March 17, 1945. 05:47 hours. Staff Sergeant James McCord crouches in a crater 30 yards from a concrete pillbox on the outskirts of Remagen, Germany. He's 23 years old. His hands won't stop shaking. Not from fear, though there's plenty of that, but from the weight of what he's carrying. It looks like his M1 Garand had a baby with a flamethrower, and the result is 22 pounds of experimental madness strapped to his shoulder. The pillbox has already killed 11 men from his company. Machine gun fire rips across the open ground every 8 seconds. McCord has counted. The concrete walls are 4 feet thick. Grenades bounce off. Bazooka rounds leave scorch marks, but nothing more. Artillery would work, but they're too close to the bridge. The bridge that's keeping Third Army from crossing the Rhine. The bridge that's worth more than gold right now. McCord looks down at the weapon in his hands. The M1A1 Rifle Flamethrower, serial number 847. He's one of exactly 43 men in the entire European theater who's been issued this thing. Nobody told him it would be this heavy. Nobody told him the fuel tanks would slosh against his ribs with every movement. Nobody told him he'd have to get within 50 feet of that pillbox for this to work. The squad leader gives the signal. McCord runs. By March 1945, the American infantry had a problem that was killing them by the hundreds. German fortifications. Not the massive concrete bunkers of the Atlantic Wall. Those had been bypassed or reduced with overwhelming firepower. These were smaller, more insidious positions. Reinforced houses, concrete pillboxes, underground bunkers, cellars with 6-foot thick walls, positions that could hold up an entire company for hours or days. Standard tactics meant casualties, lots of them. A rifle squad attacking a pillbox with grenades and small arms could expect 30 to 50% losses, even if they succeeded. Tank support helped, but tanks couldn't go everywhere. They bogged down in rubble. They were vulnerable in close urban terrain. They were in short supply after the Bulge offensive had destroyed or damaged hundreds of them. Infantry needed something they could carry, something that could reach into those fortified positions and kill the men inside without requiring a direct assault. They needed portable hellfire. The Army had flamethrowers. The M22 flamethrower had been in service since 1943. It worked. It was devastating. It was also 70 pounds when fully loaded. The soldier carrying it couldn't carry a rifle, couldn't defend himself beyond 50 feet, became the primary target for every German soldier who saw him. Flamethrower operators in Europe had a life expectancy measured in days, sometimes hours. Between June 1944 and March 1945, the Army recorded 1,847 casualties among flamethrower operators in the European theater. That was out of approximately 2,100 men trained and deployed with the weapon, an 88% casualty rate. Units were running out of volunteers. Some rifle companies refused to use flamethrowers at all because watching men burn to death when their fuel tanks were hit destroyed morale faster than German artillery. The War Department knew they needed something different, something that gave infantrymen flame capability without turning them into slow-moving targets, something that let a regular rifleman carry fire as a secondary weapon. In November 1944, at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, a team of engineers received an unusual directive. Make a flamethrower that attaches to the M1 Garand. Make it light enough that a soldier can still fight with his rifle. Make it simple enough that any infantryman can use it. Make it effective enough that it's worth carrying. They had 4 months. The engineers started with the basics. The M1 Garand was already a heavy rifle at 9.5 pounds. Add too much weight and soldiers wouldn't be able to aim it. Add too much complexity and it would break in combat. The fuel had to be carried somewhere. The ignition system had to be reliable. The nozzle had to produce a useful flame without interfering with the rifle's operation. By January 1945, they had a prototype. It weighed 12 pounds when empty, 22 pounds when loaded with fuel. It attached to the rifle's barrel with a bracket system that took 90 seconds to install. 2 fuel bottles strapped to the soldier's combat harness, a CO2 cartridge for pressure, an electric ignition coil wired to a trigger on the rifle's stock. It worked, in testing, in controlled conditions. Whether it would work when a German machine gun was shredding the air 6 inches above your helmet was another question entirely. If you want to see how this experimental weapon performed in actual combat, how it changed the way infantry fought fortified positions, and why the Germans feared it more than conventional flamethrowers, hit that like button and subscribe. The story of how 43 men used this weapon to break through defenses that had stopped entire battalions is one of the most overlooked innovations of World War II. Back to Staff Sergeant McCord. The M1A1 Rifle Flamethrower looked like something a desperate engineer sketched on a napkin and then somehow convinced the War Department to build. It consisted of 6 main components attached to or integrated with a standard M1 Garand rifle. The nozzle assembly mounted to the rifle's barrel. 4 inches long, made of heat-resistant steel, it clipped onto the barrel just behind the front sight. When not in use, it didn't interfere with the rifle's normal operation. McCord could fire his 8-round clip like any other infantryman. The nozzle had a 1/4-inch aperture that could produce a flame stream up to 50 feet under ideal conditions, 30 to 40 feet in combat. 2 fuel bottles attached to the soldier's suspender system. Each bottle held 1 pint of fuel, a mixture of gasoline and diesel designed to burn hot and stick to surfaces. Total fuel capacity, 1 quart. That translated to approximately 10 1-second bursts, or 5 2-second bursts, or 2 5-second sustained flames. After that, the weapon was just a heavy rifle. A pressure cartridge system provided propellant. A small CO2 cartridge mounted on the side of the rifle stock generated the pressure needed to force fuel through the nozzle. Each cartridge was good for approximately 15 bursts before pressure dropped below effective levels. The cartridge could be changed in about 20 seconds by a trained operator. The ignition system was the most innovative part. A battery pack the size of a cigarette case mounted on the soldier's belt. Wires ran from the battery to an ignition coil mounted just behind the nozzle. A secondary trigger, really just a button, mounted on the rifle's stock near the safety. Press the button, hold for half a second, pull the main trigger. Electric spark ignites. Vaporized fuel. Fire comes out. The entire system added 12.5 pounds to the rifle when loaded. Total weight, 22 pounds. That was 70% lighter than the M22 flamethrower. More importantly, the soldier carrying it was still a rifleman, still had his primary weapon, could still engage targets at normal rifle ranges. The effective range was 50 feet maximum, 30 feet reliable, 20 feet devastating. Those numbers were terrible compared to the M22's 75-foot range. But the M1A1 wasn't designed to replace the big flamethrower. It was designed to give regular infantrymen a close-range option for fortified positions without requiring dedicated flamethrower operators. The official designation was M1A1 Rifle Flamethrower Adapter Kit. Soldiers called it other things. The combo, Fire Garand, Hot Shot. The Germans, when they encountered it and survived, called it Teufelsattem, Devil's Breath, because it came from soldiers who looked like regular infantrymen, who didn't have the distinctive silhouette of a flamethrower operator, who could shoot you with bullets 1 second and burn you alive the next. The weapon had weaknesses. The fuel load was minimal. 10 seconds of fire if you were careful, less if you weren't. The attachment system could loosen under heavy recoil. The ignition system was vulnerable to water. The extra weight affected aim. The flame signature gave away your position to every German within 200 yards, but it worked. In testing at Aberdeen, operators successfully engaged bunker targets at 30 feet with a 93% ignition success rate. The flame burned hot enough to force defenders out of concrete positions within 3 to 5 seconds. The psychological effect was immediate and overwhelming. Production began in February 1945. The initial order was for 500 units. By March, only 87 had been manufactured due to bottlenecks in electric coil production and quality control issues with the nozzle assemblies. Those 87 were shipped to Europe with priority classification. 43 made it to frontline infantry units by mid-March. The rest sat in supply depots waiting for training protocols that didn't exist yet. McCord runs low, zigzagging every 4 steps like training taught him. The machine gun traverses. Dirt explodes to his left. He dives behind a destroyed half-track, 20 feet from the pillbox now. Close enough to hear German voices inside. Close enough to smell the cordite from their weapons. His hands find the secondary trigger. He presses it, holds it. The ignition coil should be heating up, should be ready, should be... The system requires 2 seconds to reach ignition temperature. Nobody told him that part. Or maybe they did, and he forgot because his heart is hammering so hard he can taste copper. Another soldier sprints forward, Private Daniels, 19 years old, farm kid from Iowa. The machine gun cuts him down before he makes it 5 steps. McCord watches him fall, watches him try to crawl, watches him stop moving. 2 seconds is up. McCord rises to one knee, aims at the narrow firing slit in the pillbox, 20 feet away. He can see movement inside, dark shapes against darker concrete. He pulls the trigger. Nothing happens. The electric coil is supposed to ignite vaporized fuel automatically when the trigger is pulled. But something's wrong. The connection is loose, or the battery is weak, or the fuel isn't vaporizing properly in the cold morning air. Temperature is 38 degrees. The system was tested in temperatures above 50. McCord presses the secondary trigger again. Holds it longer this time. 3 seconds. 4. His thumb is cramping. The machine gun is searching for him. Bullets chip away at the half-track's armor. He pulls the trigger. Flame erupts from the nozzle. 20 feet of liquid fire streaming toward that narrow slit. The flame is orange and yellow, with blue at the core. It sounds like 100 blowtorches firing at once. It's beautiful and terrible, and McCord is already moving, adjusting his aim, walking the fire across the pillbox face. The stream hits the firing slit. Flame pours into the opening. The machine gun stops. For 3 seconds, McCord counts their silence. Then screaming, high-pitched and desperate, the kind of screaming that makes your spine ice over. The pillbox door bursts open. 2 German soldiers stumble out. Their uniforms are burning. Their hair is burning. They're beating at their faces with hands that are also burning. One falls after 3 steps. The other makes it 6 steps before collapsing. McCord releases the trigger. 1 burst. 3 seconds. 1/10 of his fuel load gone. But the pillbox is silent. The machine gun that killed 11 men is no longer firing. The squad moves forward. They find 3 more Germans inside, dead. Not from burns, from the heat and lack of oxygen. The flame had consumed all the air in the enclosed space within seconds. They'd suffocated in their own bunker while their lungs burned from superheated air. McCord looks at the weapon in his hands, at the nozzle still glowing faintly red, at the fuel gauge showing 90% remaining. He thinks about the men he just killed, about how they died, about whether there was a better way. He doesn't have time for philosophy. There are 6 more pillboxes between here and the bridge. He has 9 more bursts left. The operation around Remagen on March 17th involved elements of the 9th Armored Division and attached infantry. McCord's unit, Company B, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, was tasked with clearing pillboxes, protecting approaches to the Ludendorff Bridge. Before McCord's first use of the M1A1, the company had taken 43 casualties in 6 hours trying to reduce these positions. After that first successful engagement at 0547 hours, tactics changed. The company began using the M1A1s aggressively. McCord and 2 other operators equipped with the weapon moved systematically from position to position. By 13:15 hours, 7.5 hours later, they had cleared 17 fortified positions with 11 total casualties. All 11 casualties were wounded, none killed. The contrast was stark. Pre-M1A1, 43 casualties, 17 killed, to clear 0 positions. Post-M1A1, 11 casualties, 0 killed, to clear 17 positions. The psychological effect on German defenders was immediate. Soldiers who saw the flame come from what looked like a standard rifle didn't understand what they were seeing. They couldn't identify the operators at a distance, couldn't target them preferentially the way they'd learned to target conventional flamethrower operators. By the time they realized what was happening, fire was pouring into their position. Prisoners captured after M1A1 attacks consistently reported the same thing. We thought they were regular riflemen until fire came out. That element of surprise was worth its weight in ammunition. News of the successful Remagen deployment spread through command channels within 48 hours. By March 20th, requests for M1A1 units flooded into supply headquarters. Units wanted them, needed them. Would trade artillery ammunition for them? The problem was supply. 87 units total in theater. 43 in frontline service. 44 sitting in depots because training protocols didn't exist. The Army hadn't anticipated the weapon would work this well. Hadn't prepared doctrine for its use. Emergency training programs began on March 22nd. 3-hour crash courses. Attach the nozzle. Connect the fuel lines. Test the ignition system. Engage targets at 20 feet on a practice range. That was it. No tactical doctrine. No integration with squad-level tactics. Just point the flame at the enemy and pull the trigger. It was enough. By April 1st, 68 M1A1 systems were in active use across 3rd Army, 7th Army, and 1st Army units. Operators shared a common profile, experienced NCOs or senior privates, men who'd seen combat, who understood close quarters fighting, who wouldn't freeze when German fire was tearing the air apart. The weapon saw heaviest use in urban combat: Aachen, Cologne, Nuremberg. Any city where German forces fortified buildings and fought room to room. The M1A1 excelled in this environment. An operator could approach a fortified building, engage through windows with rifle fire, then switch to flame for bunkers or basement positions. Sergeant Michael Torres of the 3rd Infantry Division used his M1A1 to clear 7 buildings in Nuremberg on April 18th. His after-action report noted, "Fired through ground floor windows into basement positions. Flame spreads in enclosed spaces. Enemy evacuated or died in place. Did not need to enter buildings. 0 friendly casualties." That was the key advantage. The M1A1 let infantry kill or displace defenders without entering the kill zone, without stacking up outside doors, without clearing rooms where one defender with a submachine gun could kill 3 attackers. Production ramped up. By April 15th, the Aberdeen facility was producing 30 units per week. Not enough, not nearly enough. Demand exceeded supply by a factor of 10. Units were told to share the weapons, 1 M1A1 per platoon. Rotate operators, conserve fuel. Fuel became the limiting factor. The special mixture required gasoline and diesel in specific ratios. Standard fuel supplies didn't include the right mix. Supply sergeants improvised, mixed their own batches, sometimes got the ratios wrong, and produced a fuel that wouldn't ignite or that exploded in the nozzle. 3 operators were wounded by fuel explosions in early April before quality control improved. The Germans adapted. They always adapted. By late April, German forces knew about the M1A1. Training materials captured from a German infantry battalion included specific guidance. American forces employ rifle-mounted flame weapons, effective range 30 meters, operators indistinguishable from regular infantry. Engage all infantry at close range immediately. That guidance was cold comfort for defenders. Even knowing about the weapon didn't help much when fire was streaming into your position and you had 3 seconds to evacuate or die. Statistics from April 1945 showed the impact. Infantry units with M1A1 support averaged 32% fewer casualties when reducing fortified positions compared to units without. Time to clear similar positions dropped by 47%. German surrender rates increased by 61% when M1A1s were employed. The weapon was changing infantry tactics in real time. The M1A1 worked on principles that were simple in theory, complex in execution. Pressurized fuel plus controlled ignition equals directed flame. Getting those elements to work reliably in combat conditions was the challenge. The fuel mixture was critical. Pure gasoline burned too fast, didn't stick to targets, dissipated in the air. Pure diesel didn't vaporize properly, wouldn't ignite reliably. The optimal mixture was 65% gasoline, 35% diesel. This combination vaporized easily, ignited reliably, and burned long enough to be effective. In practice, operators rarely had access to the optimal mixture. They used what supply could provide. Sometimes 70% gasoline, sometimes 50-50 mixtures. Performance varied accordingly. Higher gasoline content meant easier ignition, but less sustained burning. Higher diesel content meant harder ignition, but flames that stuck to targets and burned longer. The ignition system was the weapon's most frequent failure point. The electric coil needed to reach approximately 800 degrees Fahrenheit to reliably ignite fuel vapor. In cold weather, this took longer. In wet conditions, Water could short out the electrical connection. Operators learned to keep spare battery packs dry and waterproof. Pouches learned to test the ignition system before each mission. Learned to carry a backup lighter in case the electric system failed completely. One operator, Corporal David Chen of the 45th Infantry Division, reported using cigarette lighters to manually ignite his M1A1 on 3 occasions when the electric system failed in rain. His technique: press the lighter flame against the nozzle while pressing the trigger. Dangerous. Definitely not in the manual. But it worked. The pressure system had its own issues. CO2 cartridges lost pressure over time. A cartridge that sat for 2 weeks might only have enough pressure for 8 bursts instead of 15. Temperature affected pressure. Cold weather meant lower pressure, shorter range. Hot weather meant higher pressure, risk of overpressurization, and burst fuel lines. Operators became amateur engineers. They learned to feel the weapon's response. A strong whoosh sound meant good pressure. A weak hiss meant pressure was dropping. They learned to regulate burst length based on pressure. Long bursts when pressure was high. Short bursts when it was low. They learned to stop firing when range dropped below 20 feet because that meant pressure was nearly gone. The attachment system required constant maintenance. The bracket holding the nozzle to the rifle barrel could loosen from recoil. Standard M1 Garand recoil was already significant. Adding the nozzle and fuel weight amplified stress on the attachment points. Operators checked tightness before each engagement. Carried spare brackets. Some units had armorers modify the attachment system, adding reinforcing pins or heavier clamps. Range was always the limitation. 50 feet maximum, 30 feet reliable, 20 feet devastating. Those numbers were fixed by physics. The pressure system could only force fuel so far. Wind reduced range significantly. A 10-mile-per-hour crosswind could cut effective range to 25 feet. Rain reduced range to 20 feet. Snow was worse. Operators adapted their tactics. They used terrain, got closer, waited for optimal firing positions. A soldier with an M1A1 learned to think like a hunter. Patient, precise, picking shots. One burst could clear a position or reveal your location and get you killed. The psychological impact extended beyond just enemy fear. Friendly troops found the weapon unsettling. The smell of burning diesel and gasoline. The screaming when fire found human targets. The distinctive whoosh roar sound that was recognizable from 200 yards. Some soldiers refused to fight near M1A1 operators, afraid of being hit by friendly fire or becoming targets for German retaliation. Operators dealt with their own psychological burden. Every man who carried the M1A1 understood what it did. Understood that burning people alive was one of the worst ways to die. Some operators requested transfer after a few missions. Others became coldly professional about it, viewing the weapon as just another tool. Staff Sergeant McCord's diary entry from April 3rd. Used the burner 4 times today. 11 Germans dead. Can't think about their faces. Can't think about the sounds. Have to remember they were shooting at us first. Have to remember Phillips and Daniels and all the others they killed. Have to sleep somehow. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. The war in Europe ended. Production of the M1A1 stopped on May 15th. Total units manufactured, 653. Units that saw combat, 112. Total confirmed kills attributed to M1A1 use, approximately 2,400 enemy soldiers. The Army classified the weapon system immediately after the war. All technical documents were restricted. All after-action reports mentioning the M1A1 were reclassified. Operators were told not to discuss the weapon. The official explanation: the technology might be useful in future conflicts. The real reason was murkier. The Army wasn't sure how to handle a weapon that was so effective but so disturbing. Flamethrowers had always been controversial. The M1A1 made flame weapons accessible to regular infantry, not just specialists. That raised questions about escalation, about how future wars would be fought, about whether some weapons should remain restricted regardless of effectiveness. The weapon was tested during the Korean War in limited numbers. 3 units deployed to Korea in late 1950. They were withdrawn after 6 weeks. The official report cited maintenance difficulties in cold weather conditions. Unofficial reports suggested the weapon performed well, but that political concerns about incendiary weapons led to its removal. The M1A1 was declassified in 1967. By then, the weapon was obsolete. Modern rifles had different dimensions. The M14 and later the M16 couldn't mount the attachment system. Flamethrower technology had evolved to man-portable incendiary grenade launchers. The tactical niche the M1A1 filled was now served by other weapons. Modern militaries use different solutions for the same problem: thermobaric grenades, incendiary rockets, explosive breaching charges. These weapons are more effective and more politically acceptable than flamethrowers. They kill with pressure waves and heat rather than sustained burning. The distinction is technical more than moral, but it matters for international law and rules of engagement. 53 M1A1 units survive in museums and private collections. Another 97 are in U.S. military warehouses, preserved in Cosmoline, classified as historical artifacts. The remaining 503 were destroyed between 1946 and 1968 as part of standard equipment disposal procedures. The weapon's legacy lives in unexpected places. Modern underbarrel grenade launchers use similar attachment systems. Modern incendiary weapons employ the same principle of combining a primary weapon with a specialized close-range option. The tactical doctrine of using regular infantry to engage fortified positions with portable incendiary weapons. That started with the M1A1. Sergeant Torres wrote in 1988, "We knew what we were doing was horrible. We knew it would give people nightmares. But it saved American lives. Every position I burned out with that weapon was a position my squad didn't have to assault. Every German I killed with fire was a German who couldn't kill my men. I'll carry what I did for the rest of my life, but I'd do it again." Staff Sergeant James McCord survived the war. He returned to Indiana in July 1945. He never spoke publicly about the M1A1 until 1995, when a military historian tracked him down for an interview. By then, he was 73 years old, running a hardware store, still dreaming about March 17th, 1945. "The weapon worked," he said. "Maybe worked too well. We had something that let us kill people in one of the worst ways possible. And we used it because it saved our lives. I don't know what that says about us, about war, about what we're willing to do when we're scared and desperate." McCord died in 2003. His M1A1, serial number 847, is in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. The fuel bottles are empty. The ignition system is disconnected. The nozzle is polished to a dull shine. It looks innocuous, like something that was never used to burn men alive in concrete bunkers. Of the 112 operators who used the M1A1 in combat, 73 survived the war. 11 were killed in action. 28 were wounded. The casualty rate for M1A1 operators was significantly lower than for M22 flamethrower operators, validating the weapon's design philosophy. The technology remained classified until 1967. Operators kept their silence. They returned to civilian life, carrying memories they couldn't share. Some dealt with it better than others. Private Chen became a chemical engineer. Sergeant Torres became a teacher. Corporal Williams spent 20 years in and out of VA hospitals, fighting what would later be called PTSD. The Germans called it devil's breath. American soldiers called it the burner, the combo, fire shot. History barely remembers it at all. Just another weapon in a war full of weapons. Just another innovation born from desperation and refined through blood. But for 11 days, in March and April in 1945, the M1A1 Rifle Flamethrower changed how infantry fought. It gave soldiers fire they could carry without becoming targets. It let them burn enemies out of positions that would have required suicidal assaults. It killed 2,400 men in ways that still haunt the survivors who used it. It was effective. It was devastating. It was exactly what the Army asked for. And that might be the most disturbing thing of all. The men who carried the M1A1 into combat deserve to be remembered. Not for the weapon itself, but for what they were willing to do to protect their brothers in arms. They carried fire. They dealt death in one of its worst forms. They lived with what they did for the rest of their lives. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the cost of war and the burden carried by those who fight, hit that like button. Subscribe for more forgotten stories of World War II innovation and sacrifice. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. Did anyone in your family serve in World War II? Did they ever talk about the weapons they used or the things they saw? The stories of these veterans are fading. We have a responsibility to preserve them. To Staff Sergeant McCord, Sergeant Torres, Private Chen, and the 109 other men who used this weapon in combat, your service mattered. Your sacrifice mattered. Your story deserves to be told.